Welcome to the fascinating story of how the VOC, better known as the Dutch East India Company, emerged as the undisputed lord of Monsoon Asia during the very transformative 17th century. This is a story of ambition, adventure, and unparalleled success, as we uncover the remarkable journey of the trading powerhouse that not only reshaped the course of world history, but also witnessed the rise of legends and the birth of colonial empires. Vasco da Gama's revolution, using the unifying characteristic of oceans, unlike Columbus, was not the discovery of a new world but just the discovery of a new route to the world, connected through land for centuries. Europe and Asia are one vast geographical continuum, connected with both land and sea, and have had intensive commercial and cultural contacts known since Roman times. But the logistical advantage of direct long-distance sea transport over the land route made it important for trade with the East. The continental landmass was interconnected with the dry arid zone earlier, constituting important routes joining Africa, Europe, and Asia, wherever the logistical possibilities were exceptionally well suited for long-distance trade. These dry routes were traditionally the habitat of cattle-rearing and trading nomads, with their caravans of camels and horses, and the warring tradition of many people in these areas gave the arid zone enormous potential for producing military power. The transitional frontier zones between these dry nomadic zones and the wetter agricultural regions typically developed as centers of great economic and political vibrancy. It is no coincidence that the capitals of the most extensive empires in Eurasia were either on the sea coasts, Lisbon, Amsterdam, and London, or at the very edge of the arid zone, Delhi and Beijing. These empires proved capable of exploiting the dynamics of both maritime and continental frontier regions. The best example is the Mughals in Delhi, who had connections both with the sea trade via Surat to the Indian Ocean and with the caravan trade via Kabul to Central Asia. These empires were not merely closed geographic blocks but rather extensive open networks of highways and trading routes that were highly adaptable, which were dispersed assemblies of military financial elites exploited to the fullest extent by the traders. This far-reaching open configuration also gave the Dutch East India Company the opportunity to simply plug into the system and play an active role in the region by maintaining good linkages to these imperial networks. The northwestern corner of Eurasia, in modern Europe, had experienced little or no influence from the forces of the connecting arid zone for a long time. Here, not the nomadic warfare on horseback but the combined development of artillery and infantry with firearms dominated the state format. Except for Russia and the Ottoman Empire, which have one foot in the nomadic world, the rest of Europe's coastal areas had more or less free reign, mostly free from the continental powers. The successful Dutch uprising in the mid-16th century against the Spanish branch of the Habsburg dynasty in this sense marks a new conquest of the land from the sea. The VOC replicated this Dutch success of the coast against the imperial hinterland in the relatively wet littorals of the Indian Ocean region. In contrast, the coastal areas of Iran, India, and China that lay within the reach of the imperial cavalry were much less susceptible to such autonomous coastal development. Thus, it was not only the commercial considerations, but also the geopolitical circumstances in Eurasia that explain why the VOC was able to become such a commanding coastal power, particularly in the Indonesian archipelago, in Ceylon, and, to a lesser extent, also along the Malabar coast. In most other parts of Asia, however, it progressed no further than establishing trading stations. In the 16th and 17th centuries, large empires of the Ottomans, Safavids, Mughals, and Manchus succeeded in uniting dry and wet areas under their authority, with the last two empires in particular benefiting from the highly productive, intensive rice cultivation in the coastal areas within the reach of the wet monsoons. Wet rice cultivation also played a key role in the other polities of Southeast Asia, but in this region, the interior was made up not of the open, dry transitional areas of the arid zone but of dense tropical rainforests, which, in a logistical sense, was much more difficult for military and political scope. Therefore, the VOC was able to embed itself relatively easily in the tropical islands and coasts of the most southern parts of the Indian Ocean, which were the exclusive production areas for cloves, nutmeg, mace, and cinnamon. And here, the company was able to impose a commercial monopoly rapidly, using mainly military means based on superior shipping, against both its Asian and European competitors. Since ancient times, commerce in Asia has been working on the rhythm of the monsoon, which evolved into three major trade circuits: 1. The Arabian Sea, 2. The Bay of Bengal, and 3. The Chinese Seas. The annual rhythm of the monsoon, southwesterly winds from April to August and northeasterly winds from December to March, also determined the rhythm of continental commercial traffic, making intensive contacts between coastal areas. Unsurprisingly, the most important entrepôts were to be found in the regions where these circuits overlapped, like Surat, Calicut, Goa, and Malacca. The VOC too adapted the rhythm of the monsoon in the Indian Ocean but tried to deny the segmentation into three trading circuits. By using the consistent winds of roaring 40s along the 41st parallel lines from the Cape, which Dutch explorer Hendrik Brouwer discovered as the Southeast Passage to gain direct and quick access to the Sunda Strait, Dutch ships have been able to avoid this entire system since 1611. Thus, the Dutch initially made forced entry into the trading system of the Indian Ocean from the periphery, developing Batavia at a natural intersection, a central meeting place in Asia, and thus developing a new trading pattern based on long distance. Via Batavia, both the Japanese copper and the fine spices were marketed in Surat. The VOC simply made use of the existing inter-Asian market relations to create a surplus to fund the purchase for Europe, and avoid a bullion drain. What was unusual in the Indian Ocean was the fact that now a single trading company wanted to take control of the whole process, from production to marketing, in more than two circuits. Obviously, the other European countries were also capable of breaking through this triple segmentation. However, it was ultimately mainly the VOC that managed to claim important parts of the direct long-distance trade between the Netherlands and Asia entirely for itself. It is important to note that in the 15th and 16th centuries, with increased inter-Asian coastal trading activities, some coastal regions were able to free themselves politically from the interior, as in the case of Gujarat and Bengal in India and Burma in Pegu. However, in China, initially, the central government was able to avoid a similar process by rigorously restricting and controlling maritime trade activities. But at the end of the 17th century, the south coast of China also threatened to break out of the empire. This prompted the several continental political centers in Asia to reintegrate with the coast and interior, as happened, for example, early on in India under the Mughals and somewhat later in China under the Manchus. Similar attempts in Mataram in Java and Kandy in Ceylon failed, following interventions by the VOC, a giant maritime world power by that time. In the regions to the north of the tropical islands, the effects of the VOC's presence were relatively limited. In spite of the VOC's spice monopoly and the growing market for these commodities in Europe, the existing trade network in the region continued more or less unchanged. The role of the VOC remained relatively marginal to the end, and ultimately it was the English private country traders who managed to attract an important part of the trade that had been run by traditional Arab, Armenian, Indian, Chinese, Malay, and Buginese trade networks in the region. Moreover, it was in the island world of the tropics that the Dutch East India Company was ultimately able to acquire the greatest influence in Asia. The climate and ecosystem may well have been radically different from Northwest Europe, but nonetheless, for the Dutch, it was a relatively easily accessible and attractive region. The great attraction of the tropical islands was, of course, the range of fine spices produced there: cinnamon in Ceylon, cloves, nutmeg, and mace in the Maluku Islands. The geographical aspect was crucial for the success of the Dutch East India Company, in contrast to pepper, for example, which was in high demand in Europe. The centers of production of the spice crops were concentrated within a compact area, which allowed the company, with the help of its sophisticated fleet, to achieve a de facto monopoly on these commodities. It may seem obvious, but it is no coincidence at all that it was precisely here, in the tropical, maritime periphery of Asia, beyond the great continental empires, that the Dutch were able to portray themselves as true colonizers about a century before the British did the same in India. This is where the Dutch developed from a trading company into a territorial power.